Well, hello again. Thank you for attending the week 4 lecture in organizational sociology. Tonight, I would like to talk a little bit about stereotypes. Uh, you're going to be reading about stereotypes in the workplace and in organizations, but I would like to present a little information, background information on stereotypes in organizations and out. So let's take a look at stereotypes in general and understand what they are, because you're going to look at the way that women are stereotyped in the workplace, the way that minority groups, other minority groups are stereotyped in the workplace. What is, and how people are kind of pigeonholed. So let's take a look at stereotypes in general to understand what they are. First of all, stereotypes are, and here's just kind of a definition, a simple definition. They are unreliable generalizations about all members of a group that do not take into account individual differences within the group. So the assumption is that, and I'll throw out a couple of stereotypes here. All jocks are dumb. All blondes have more fun, or and you can get darker and darker with these stereotypes, like all Mexicans are lazy, all Polish people are stupid, all and the list goes on and on. Women are bad drivers, Asians are bad drivers. It's just old people are like this, young people are like that. So I know that you've heard of many stereotypes, but if these are generalizations, how did they get there? Why are they held? So let's take a little bit of a look at stereotypes. First of all, in-groups view out-groups as having less variation or fewer variations or individuality within them. They're all like that. The people who are part of my group, we are a varied group, and I can, because they're standing right next to me, either literally or socially speaking, I know that there's great variation between us. We all have our gifts, but all those people are alike. You can't trust them. They're all this way. They're all dishonest, they're all stupid, or they're all bad drivers. You can't do this, you can't do, or you can only expect this from them. So yeah, these stereotypes can start by just one particular group viewing another group as having that little, a little bit less of that variation or individuality. Oh, they're all like this. They're all the same. You can't tell them apart because they're all like this. But going back to that definition, these are exaggerated generalizations. So why are they so widely held? Well, the answer is explained in two main aspects of stereotypes, if we take stereotypes apart. First of all, stereotypic traits may arise or have arisen at one time out of real conditions. That does not mean, for instance, let's go back to the stereotype that all Mexicans are lazy. No, that doesn't mean that at one time Mexicans were lazy. No. What happened was perhaps that one group saw another group taking a siesta because in a hotter climate, or for whatever social reason, that is the tradition. You work hard, but you have downtime during the hottest time of the day in a hotter climate. And the prejudiced mind looks at that and says, that's laziness. Taking a sleep in the middle of the day, that's laziness. Total misinterpretation, but it kind of arose out of a specific condition. Okay, take all Polish people are stupid. All Poles are stupid. You probably have heard somebody say that somewhere. At one time, when Polish people were coming to the United States, they were coming, and we're talking about 100 years ago. A lot of Polish people were coming to the United States not knowing English, and a lot of them didn't learn it. They lived in Polish neighborhoods, especially back east. The whole groups living in a Polish neighborhood, and that was actually my grandparents and great grandparents' family on one side of my family were living in a Polish neighborhood, and certain members of their family didn't learn English quite as well as others, and Well, the stereotype, the prejudiced mind looks at that and says they're too stupid. They're stupid. They don't understand us. They don't understand their their adopted country's language. So again, these stereotypic traits may arise or have arisen at one time out of a real condition, but a total misinterpretation based on prejudice has occurred. The second aspect of stereotypes is their role in the self-fulfilling prophecy. So what is a self-fulfilling prophecy? Well, the dominant group, or any group that has power over another group, even if it's just to call them names, even if it's just to influence the stereotype, the dominant group and often other minorities create barriers, making it difficult for a minority group to act differently from the stereotype. So if one group of people is perceived as, the only honest occupation they could have is to go into sports, or okay, this group is good at sports, this group is good at science, it may become the actual truth because so many kids are pushed towards sports or pushed towards science, whether they wanted to study art or literature or become the next movie star or whatever. They would likely be discouraged from doing that, and because the stereotype actually works its way and into this institutional prejudice that occurs, where actually, especially if it goes unquestioned, people may innocently or not so innocently intend to help children, like school teachers or counselors, trying to push them and actually push certain groups into areas of study based on stereotypes and discourage them from entering other areas. So yeah, if you push a bunch of Japanese American children into the sciences and create barriers to them studying art or literature or interpretive dance or something like that, or writing or journalism, you push them into the sciences, you're going to have a lot of kids grow up to be scientists who are Japanese American. So it becomes that self-fulfilling prophecy. So there's this application of pressure towards conformity to the stereotype. And sometimes minority members belong to that group can perpetuate this. That people can buy into this stereotype. They hear it all the time. They hear what is considered beautiful, what is considered to be acceptable for them, for other people, what does society consider to be attractive or desirable or a good occupation for them, based on, it could be just based on the color of their skin or other physiological variable. So sometimes minority members can perpetuate this too. So how do we reduce prejudice? That's really, really important. If we're going to eradicate stereotypes, we're going to at least reduce their potency. How do we do that? Well, there are 6 ways to reduce prejudice that I wanted to present to you in this particular lecture. The first is legislation and equal opportunity, making sure our laws hand out pretty much the same penalties for the same crimes, for the same number of crimes, that sort of thing. That one group isn't singled out based on race or religion or gender, or making sure that we really have equal opportunity under the law, and not just our judicial branch, but also making sure that anyone can buy a house in any neighborhood if they have the wherewithal to do that, the financial ability to do that, making sure that basically opportunities truly are equal, and that takes work. All of these 6 ways to reduce prejudice take work, and it takes continuous refocus on these on these ways to reduce prejudice, to continue to not be, or to at least reduce the influence that these broadcasts of these stereotypes have on us, because we're constantly getting the same message. This group's like this, that group's like that. So That brings us to number 2, call people on it. Don't tolerate it. Now, don't put yourself in a situation where you're going to be assaulted or something like that. I'm not talking about that. But, you can, there are ways to, conversationally say, I'm sorry, that's simply not true. And no, I'm not going to listen to you use those kinds of words, or that's, maybe you need to re-examine this. Does that make sense to you, that everybody who's part of a particular organization, odds are we all have maybe a relative or a coworker or somebody who's, who's not basically challenging their own prejudgments, their own prejudices. They're not re-examining their attitudes. And really sometimes coming in with a more conversational approach, sometimes the barriers, the resistance doesn't go up quite the way it would if you, presented it very confrontationally. So it's really hard to do. I'm not saying go out there and just, that it's an easy thing to do. It's very hard, and it doesn't always get easier with time. But unless people kind of call each other on it and say, that is not acceptable. I'm sorry that, and here's an even better argument. It really defies logic. Say, how does that make any sense whatsoever? Say, where did you get that information? Challenge them on that. Education, number 3, kind of what we're doing here. I'm very encouraged to see that now, unlike maybe 30 years ago, 40 years ago, school programs address prejudice and intergroup relations, discrimination, attitudes as regular curriculum from a very young age. From a very young age. It's slow to change, but there have been changes. So, why do we also continually have the sensitivity training, what we call sensitivity training, or, kind of latent prejudice training, training, to fight against latent discrimination, that sort of thing that works its way into the organization. How do you recognize it? Why do we have all these trainings? Well, part of it is that we continually need to be reminded, and also culture changes. How do we recognize some of these, this is what's happening. Have you noticed, for instance, in a fashion magazine that you don't see people from certain races portrayed, or certain maybe certain genders, or is it more women who are being objectified? Or in Sports Illustrated, how often do you see the female athletes? That sort of thing. So kind of bringing attention to it through education is a very powerful way to reduce prejudice. Secondly, changing how the media portrays people. Again, sometimes just writing a letter, or tweeting out something, or making a comment. Again, sometimes making it a little less visceral, and a little more, in terms of a logical argument of this. Saying, look, I'm sorry, this is not appropriate. I'm not going to be looking at this particular channel anymore. I'm not going to watch your programs anymore, because this is not appropriate at all. It's very tempting to get really angry at times about how the media portrays people, or what you see, or what you hear, even in like Starbucks or something like that. But often, remembering that education is a lifelong pursuit. You really have to continually work, because socialization is a lifelong pursuit. So continually being open to messages, and words change too. What is considered to be an appropriate term today may be considered a slur tomorrow, just because the meaning of the word has changed some, or maybe it's just considered a derogatory word. So that can catch up with you over the decades, where something that was completely appropriate 20 years ago was not considered offensive is considered offensive now. Language changes. It is fluid. It is part of culture. So keep an eye open for those kinds of little catches. Now, 5 and 6 work very well together. 5 and 6 are very important, deterrents. And ways to reduce prejudices that people have already adopted. It's not just kind of, because you basically give them a situation that completely unravels that attitude. First of all, contact hypothesis is equal status contact. So it states that intergroup contact between people of equal status in harmonious circumstances, in other words, they're not competing with each other, will cause them to be less prejudiced and abandon previously held stereotypes. So, you know, why was it that your fourth grade science teacher decided with whom you would be partnering in that little experiment, or in high school you had to collaborate with the people with whom, you know, in your small groups, with whom the teacher placed you. You didn't get to choose just your friendship group. Why would they do that? Well, one of the things is to mix it up, you know, intellectually, but also to get people in a situation where they are working together as equals. Okay, and once you are faced with people who pretty much break the minority, because minorities are really thin, they are two-dimensional, and now you've got three-dimensional people in front of you with all of their likes and dislikes and differences of personality. It's really hard to hold on to that stereotype when you're interacting with people who break it. And such contact improves attitudes of both minority and majority groups. Number 6, shared goals. And when paired with that equal status contact, this is one of the most effective ways to battle prejudice in any environment. You know, again, going back to looking at shared goals, if you have equal status contact and a shared goal, and that is to get an A in science on this science project, or to put out the school newspaper, or to work well in an inter-office, goal-oriented group where you're working with people in other departments and that sort of thing. That's a good way to reduce prejudice, because you're not just working with people of equal status to you, you know, that you're basically your peers, but you're sharing goals. So those two, number 5 and 6, when paired, really are quite effective. So if you have further questions about prejudice in general, or about stereotypes, or want to talk a little bit more about this, especially in the realm of organizations, not just workplaces but beyond, please feel free to jump onto your virtual office and talk to your professor and your peers about it. Have a great evening.